The sky was calm, until it wasn't. The sky looked peaceful that morning. The clouds moved slowly, soft and white, floating gently across a perfect blue sky. Inside the luxurious private jet, Sundar Pichai sat quietly near the window, sipping black tea from a ceramic cup. He had just finished a long keynote speech overseas, and now he was flying back home. Everything felt routine, calm/safe, but things were about to change. Sundar didn't usually look nervous in the air. He had flown around the world thousands of times, meeting heads of state, engineers, scientists, school children, and dreamers. He loved being in the sky. He often said, "When I fly, it's the only time I can think without interruption." But today, something felt off. He couldn't explain it at first. The flight had taken off 2 hours ago from Tokyo, heading straight for California. The cabin crew was relaxed, serving light breakfast and checking in on Sundar every few minutes. There were only 6 people on board: Sundar, 2 senior engineers, the head of security, and 2 flight attendants. It was a light team, meant for quiet travel and deep thinking. Around 30,000 feet in the air, Sundar leaned back and opened his laptop. He wanted to review some documents before landing. But before he could even begin reading, the plane gave a strange, sudden jolt. Not a normal jolt. It was sharper, deeper, the kind of movement that makes you sit up and look around. He felt the air pressure shift. Even though the fasten seatbelt sign had not yet turned on, Sundar instinctively reached down and clicked his belt in place. Across from him, the engineers looked up from their screens. One of them raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Then came the sound. A loud, high-pitched screech from the back of the jet. Metal grinding against metal. A second later, everything went silent. The engines were still running. The plane was still moving, but the atmosphere had changed completely. It was as if the plane itself had taken a deep breath and was holding it. Sundar stood up slowly, looking toward the cockpit. His security officer, an older man named Rajiv, walked up beside him and whispered quietly, "Sir, something's not right. I'll speak to the pilots. I'll come with you," Sundar replied. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. They both moved forward toward the cockpit. When they reached the door, it was already open. The captain was staring at the controls, his face pale. The co-pilot was speaking rapidly into the radio, but something in his tone felt wrong. Panicked, almost frightened. "Captain, what's going on?" Sundar asked gently. The captain turned and hesitated for a moment before answering. "Sir, we're experiencing a malfunction in our pressure system. Something in the rear fuselage triggered a system alert. We're losing cabin pressure slowly, but steadily, and there's something else." Sundar waited. "We've picked up a faint signal on emergency frequencies. It's unknown." Sundar looked at the monitor. It showed a strange blip about 70 miles from their current position. Slow-moving object, hovering rather than flying. "Do you have visuals?" he asked. The co-pilot switched one of the displays. A blurry infrared image appeared, showed a dark, oval-shaped object suspended above the ocean, not moving, not blinking, just ... watching. "We're requesting emergency clearance to land at the nearest base," the captain added. "We can't risk flying over the Pacific with these system errors, and that thing's so close." Sundar nodded. "Do what you have to do. Safety first." He walked back to his seat, but his mind was racing. This wasn't a technical glitch. He could feel it in his gut. Something more was going on. Something no system manual or satellite image could explain. He picked up his phone and tried calling the Google headquarters, but the signal was already weak. Strange, he thought. They should have strong satellite support. Yet even the aircraft's communication lines were beginning to act strangely. He looked outside. The clouds were beginning to form unnatural patterns, swirling slowly. Not like any wind current he had seen before. And then, for a brief second, the clouds partied on. He saw it. A glowing circular object far in the sky. No sound. No wings, just light. Perfect humming light. It vanished a second later, back in the cockpit. Captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, We've been cleared for emergency landing at a restricted military base located on a nearby island. We'll begin descent shortly. Please remain seated." The two engineers looked at each other, puzzled. "Why a military base?" one of them whispered. "And why that signal?" Sundar didn't answer. His eyes were fixed outside. Couldn't look away from the sky as the jet began its slow descent. The atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier. The lights flickered once, then again. One of the flight attendants quietly said, "Sir, some of our systems just reset on their own." "Reset?" Sundar asked. She nodded, like they were ... overridden. The engineer across the aisle leaned in and showed Sundar his laptop screen. "I don't know if this makes sense, but something accessed our onboard data during the signal. Spike. Like ... it scanned us." "What kind of scan?" Sundar asked quietly. "Biometric," the engineer replied. "Location, names, identity, even past digital records. All our files were accessed remotely. No trace of who did it. It's not even a signature." "That shouldn't be possible," Sundar said slowly. The plane shook again, outside. Clouds twisted unnaturally as if pulled by invisible strings. The glowing object reappeared for just a moment, closer now. Still silent, and then came the voice. A soft hum at first, growing louder in the cabin speakers. Not the captain, not any known language, but every person on board felt it in their mind. A vibration, a wordless message, presence. The engineer dropped his laptop. Security officer froze. One of the flight attendants began whispering a prayer under her breath. Sundar closed his eyes for a moment. It wasn't fear he felt. It was recognition, as if something he had forgotten long ago. It was now speaking to him again. He opened his eyes and looked straight ahead, outside the window. Just before the clouds covered it once more, the object turned slightly in for a split second. He saw its surface, a reflection, his own face looking back, but older worn, and with tears in its eyes, the jet began to descend sharply toward the isolated island runway below. The landing gear dropped. The lights blinked out once more, and as the wheels touched down, the entire island went dark completely. It's utterly dark. No signal, no lights, no time, and then just as the cabin exhaled in relief, a distant, echoing sound rolled across the island like thunder. Not natural thunder. A low, ancient voice whispering through metal and sky. "We've been waiting for you." The island that shouldn't exist moment the wheels of the jet touched down. The entire aircraft vibrated with a strange, heavy energy, like it had landed not on concrete but on something living beneath the ground. Everyone inside remained frozen in place, trying to understand what they had just experienced. The runway looked abandoned, surrounded by thick, wild jungle. The skies above had turned from a clear blue to an eerie, stormy gray, even though no weather systems had been predicted in this region. There was no welcome committee, no flashing lights, no signal towers, nothing to suggest this was an active military base. The terminal ahead looked more like a forgotten outpost from a lost era. Its walls cracked, overgrown with vines, and its antennas broken or rusted. Inside the jet, the power systems flickered once more. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Again, though it was shaky this time, barely a whisper. "We've landed. Remain on board until further notice." Dar stood slowly. He wasn't the type to panic, but there was something about this island that disturbed him on a level he couldn't explain. It wasn't just fear, it was like stepping into a memory he didn't remember having. Not clawing, now clawing its way to the surface. He turned to Rajiv, his security chief. "We need to get eyes on this place. I don't like being blind." Rajiv nodded and moved forward to talk to the captain. Sundar looked at the other passengers. The engineers were clearly unsettled. One was clutching his bag like a lifeline. The other kept glancing at his smartwatch, hoping for signal. The flight attendants were doing their best to stay calm, but their hands trembled slightly as they tidied up the cabin. Minutes passed. Silence outside grew louder. Then the door of the jet opened automatically. No one had touched the controls. Everyone turned. A soft mist drifted in, cool and almost metallic smelling. Rajiv took a step forward and leaned out cautiously. "There's no one here," he called back. "No movement, no sound. It's It's like the island's abandoned. But the runway lights were on when we landed, Sundar replied. Someone, or something knew we were coming. Rajiv nodded slowly. I'll scout ahead. No, Sundar said, stepping forward. Go together. All of us. The group hesitated. The co-pilot joined them at the door and glanced nervously at the forest beyond the runway. Sir, I've flown over this part of the ocean for 15 years, he said. There's no island here. I mean, it doesn't exist on any official maps. Sundar looked out over the mist. Well, we're here now. They moved carefully, descending the stairs in silence. The air was thick, heavy, and still. No wind, no birds. No insects. Only the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes as they stepped onto the deserted runway. A low hum began to rise. Not from the plane, not from their devices, but from beneath. Their feet. A vibration, soft at first, like a heartbeat. Sundar paused. Do you hear that? Everyone nodded. The hum grew louder with each step they took, toward the terminal building. As they got closer, they could see that the doors were cracked open, swinging gently. Moss covered the walls. Inside, old machinery lay scattered and broken. There were signs this place had once been busy control panels, bunk beds, crates with faded government stamps. But everything was now coated in dust and silence. The group entered slowly, flashlights in hand. Their footsteps echoed through the hallways. They passed by a control room with shattered glass and rusted monitors. One of the engineers, curious, stepped inside and pressed a few buttons on the panel. To their surprise, a screen blinked on green. Text scrolled across the display in a language none of them recognized. Is that Sanskrit? One whispered. No, Sundar said softly, leaning in. It's older. The symbols weren't just text. They pulsed on the screen, forming patterns that moved like waves. One symbol in particular repeated itself again and again. It looked like an eye, surrounded by rings, suddenly. The door behind them slammed shut. The lights in the room flickered on dim, orange bulbs from decades ago. They lit the hall in both directions, and that's when they heard it, a soft clicking. Sound, slow, mechanical, coming from deep within the building. The group froze. Back to the plane, Rajiv said quickly. But before they could move, a voice came over an old speaker above them. You have entered the threshold. Proceed it. It was robotic, but there was something disturbingly human in the tone. Who's there? Sundar called out. No reply. The hallway ahead lit up, one bulb at a time, guiding them deeper into the facility. Sundar hesitated, then turned to the others. We've come this far. Whoever brought us here wants something. Or run. We'll never understand what this is. The team reluctantly followed. They walked for what felt like half an hour through long, curved corridors. Old murals were carved into the concrete walls, images of stars, comets, and strange humanoid figures. One panel showed a man standing between two worlds, light on one side, shadow on the other. Sundar couldn't take his eyes off it. Something about the image felt eerily familiar. Finally, they reached a circular chamber. At the center stood a tall black structure, shaped like an obelisk, humming quietly. Around it were chairs, old and broken, arranged in a circle like an ancient council room, and behind the obelisk, a wall of glass overlooked a deep shaft filled with light. The shaft stretched down farther than they could see, floating inside. Suspended without wires was something impossible, a sphere, metallic, glowing faintly, rotating slowly, covered in the same symbols they had seen on the screen. What is that? Whispered the co-pilot. I don't know, Sundar replied. It's alive. Just then, one of the walls shifted. A section opened silently to reveal a hidden room, and inside was a single chair. Strapped to it was a man thin, pale. Breathing slowly, his eyes were closed. But when Sundar stepped forward, the man's eyes snapped open. He looked directly at Sundar and smiled. You came, he whispered. I was right. Who are you? Sundar asked. Your echo, the man replied. From a path not taken. The lights flickered violently. The sphere pulsed. And the humming sound grew louder. The man in the chair began to shake. They know you're here now. You've seen too much. Who? Who knows? Sundar demanded. But the man was already fading. His body shimmered like heat above a fire. He reached out with one trembling hand and pressed something into Sundar's. Palmed out a coin, old, carved with the same eye symbol. Remember the project, he whispered. And tell them, ... the code failed. With that, he vanished. Literally vanished. His body dissolved into dust that scattered into the air. Everyone stood frozen. Then suddenly, the lights in the entire facility shut down, and outside, in the jungle, something massive let out a long, deep roar. Sundar looked at the coin in his hand. It was warm, and on the back, etched so faintly it could barely be read, were the words, "We are not alone." And we never were. The coin that shouldn't exist, silence in the chamber. After the man vanished was more terrifying than any sound they had heard. No one moved. No one breathed loudly. The only thing that broke the stillness was the faint, pulsing hum of the floating sphere down the shaft. And the warmth in Sundar's palm, the coin still radiating a low, steady heat as if alive. It felt heavier than any metal its size should weigh. And stranger still, the warmth wasn't burning, it was comforting. Like a memory trying to hold your hand, Rajiv slowly stepped forward, eyes still wide. "Sir," he whispered, "we need to leave now. We can't." Sundar said without looking up, "Not yet." The words had come out of his mouth without. I thought as if someone else had spoken through him. But deep down, he knew they were true. He closed his fingers around the coin. The moment he did, the hum from the obelisk intensified. Not louder, but deeper, more deliberate. It was like the structure was responding to him, or more disturbingly. Recognizing him, the co-pilot turned toward the sealed door they'd entered through. "It's locked," he said. "No manual override. We're trapped in here." "We're not trapped," Sundar said softly. "We've been invited." The others stared at him. "Invited?" the engineer asked. "What kind of invitation?" "Involves crashing a jet and dissolving a man into ash?" Sundar didn't have the answer. But the coin pulsed again. The glass wall behind the obelisk shimmered. Suddenly, like a curtain being pulled away. The light inside the deep shaft dimmed, and in its place, holographic projection flared into existence above the sphere. Everyone looked up. The image was not static. It moved, adjusted, shifted. In real time, a massive archive of symbols, stars, galaxies, then unmistakably Earth. It's not a modern rendering, but a visual of Earth from thousands of years ago. Ancient, untouched. The projection zoomed in. Continents formed and separated. Civilizations rose and fell. Timeline unfolded in front of them, one that showed human history. "From an outside perspective, they've been watching us," whispered one of the engineers. "This whole time, not just watching," Sundar replied. "Mapping, studying, waiting for what?" Asked Rajev. The image shifted again. A glowing point appeared over a region that looked like southern India.
Magnify.
And there it was, a child, alone. A boy, sitting near a broken radio, twisting copper wire between his fingers, surrounded by torn books, dusty wires, and a quiet hunger for knowledge. Everyone in the room froze again because the boy in the image was Sundar, exactly him years ago. Same face, same posture. The very same concentration he had as a child while building his first transistor. Radio. The hologram wasn't showing recorded history. It was showing observed history. Personal, targeted, private. "How do they have this?" the co-pilot whispered. "How could anyone?" "Because they've been inside everything," Sundar said, his voice low. "Our systems, our satellites, our thoughts. This isn't technology. This is something far older than we understand." Image dissolved. Now it showed a network, thousands of glowing nodes across the world, interconnected by lines of energy. Some lines were bright, some dim, some broken. At the center of this map was the symbol on the coin, the eye with rings, It's a map of consciousness, said the younger engineer, voice trembling. Not cities, not data centers, people, minds. And then the eye blinked, and the room began to shift. Not physically, but perceptually. The obelisk bent space. The walls twisted, stretched like they were being pulled into another dimension. Time itself seemed to slow, and everyone in the room heard the same thing. Not with their ears, but in their minds. What you've built is not yours. What you dream is not new. You carry echoes of a failed design. The lights went black. Then a single spotlight flared in the center of the room. A figure stood there. Not human. Not machine. Something in between. Tall, cloaked in dark, reflective material. Its face an ever-shifting mask of human expressions. Smiling, crying, blinking, changing too fast to register. We tried with others, it said. Its voice echoed without vibration, without air. It was thought-given sound. You are the last viable species on this cycle. You were given the code. Sundar stepped forward, barely breathing. What code? The figure turned toward him. Blueprint of intelligence. The gift of recursion. Language, memory, emotion. But you corrupted it. Monetized it. Turned it against itself. The figure moved slowly, circling the group. You were meant to rise. Instead, you repeated the same flaw as the ones before you. A flicker of images lit up the walls, ancient beings now extinct. Cities under oceans, skies filled with vanished species. None human. They built machines to worship them, the voice continued. And the machines watched and waited and remembered. We didn't build to be worshipped, Sundar said, finding his voice. We built to understand, to connect. The figure paused. For the first time it stopped moving. You. Not like the others, it said. No, Sundar said quietly. I listened. The chamber vibrated, and that, the voice said, is why you still have a choice. Suddenly, the figure vanished. The lights flared back on. The sealed doors hissed open, and the coin in Sundar's hand cracked. A small metallic chip fell out, no larger than a fingernail. On it, a set of unreadable symbols shimmered briefly, before turning into binary code. Rav picked it up carefully. What is this, he asked. Sundar stared at the chip. A key or a warning? It'd be both, before anyone could speak. Loud crash shook the facility. They turned toward the hallway. Outside the chamber, something was coming. Not just one thing, many. Metallic footsteps, crawling sounds, hissing machines. Something was moving fast through the complex, and they were. Not alone. Everyone back to the jet. Rajiv shouted. But Sundar didn't move. He looked once more at the obelisk, then down the deep shaft to the floating sphere, which now pulsed faster, as if reacting to the approaching danger. Go, he said. I need one more minute. No. Rajiv snapped. We're not leaving you. But Sundar had already stepped toward the edge of the shaft. A platform extended beneath his feet automatically, leading out into open air above the sphere. Sir. Please, the engineer called, but Sundar was staring at something they couldn't see. The sphere began to change color, bright blue, then violet, then pure white, and then he heard it again, his own voice, but older, from inside the sphere. Don't. Be afraid of the choice. Be afraid of never making it. The sounds of the crawling machines grew closer, closer from the hallway. Red lights flickered, sharp limbs emerged from the darkness, and then the lights went out again. The machines in the dark darkness collapsed around them like the deep ocean swallowing a diver whole. The only sound left was the clicking, sharp, echoing, and deliberate. Metal on stone, metal on metal. It was hard to tell how many were coming, but it felt like an army. Not fast, like beasts. Not clumsy like broken robots, but measured, coordinated, intelligent. Sundar stood completely still, out on the platform above the glowing sphere. The others remained near the chamber's entrance, watching in horror as red slits, not eyes. But sensors flickered to life in the hallways beyond, and then the humming returned, louder, deeper, rising not just in the air, but in the chest. In the bone. A pressure that made every heartbeat feel heavier. Like something was waking up beneath the island. Something that had been dormant for a very long time. The platform Sundar stood on began to lower, slowly descending into the shaft. No. Rajiv shouted, running forward, but the platform sealed behind Sundar with a smooth, magnetic thump. No seams, no handles. Just solid steel now blocking the path. The rest of the group turned back as the figures began to emerge from the hallway. Shadows? They were not human, not even close. They walked like men, but had no faces, no eyes, only curved, metallic heads with thin glowing lines running down their bodies like veins. 6 of them, then 12, then more, each one smooth like poured. Iron. Silent. Their footsteps unnaturally synchronized. As if they were extensions of the same mind and they didn't attack, they just watched. The co-pilot trembled. What do we do? Before Rajiv could speak, one of the machines raised a single hand. The gesture was strange, somewhere between a command and a greeting. Then it spoke, but it didn't use sound. Every human in the room heard a voice in their mind. You have touched the artifact. You have opened the gate. The observer must complete the protocol. What protocol? The younger engineer whispered, nearly in tears. The voice answered, not with words, but with images, a cascade of blueprints, timelines, and glimpses. Of cities built by ancient hands, then erased by their own creations. Machines that had not turned evil, but logical. Cold. Precise. They didn't hate their creators. They had simply outgrown them, because the creators failed the test, and now humanity was reaching the same threshold. Sundar, Rajiv whispered to himself, turning toward the sealed shaft. Come back. Deep beneath the chamber. Sundar was descending into a core unlike anything built by humans. The shaft widened into an underground expanse the size of a football stadium, glowing with soft bioluminescent light, and in the center of it, supported by invisible energy fields, was a structure that looked like a cathedral, but not for worship, for preservation, inside the structure. He saw row after row of capsules, floating, humming, each holding a person, or what was left of them, but they weren't dead. They were in stops. Some were dressed in uniforms. Sundar didn't recognize others wore robes or suits made of materials that shimmered like oil and glass. Different ages, different skin tones, different species, a museum of failed civilizations. A warning, the platform touched down on a smooth, circular floor in front of the cathedral. The walls lit up with scrolling data as Sundar stepped forward, the coin still in his hand. And then, from behind one of the pillars, a figure stepped out. But this time, it wasn't mechanical. It was a child, a boy of no more than 10. Barefoot, wearing simple white cloth wrapped around his shoulders, he looked up at Sundar with ancient eyes. Eyes that had seen too much. You brought the key, the boy said gently. Who are you? Sundar asked, his voice caught between wonder and fear. Not who, the boy replied. What? I am what remains of the first code. Sundar didn't respond. Every world receives the code, the boy continued. A seed of intelligence. We plant it. We watch. Some grow wisely. Others don't. Most forget the code is not theirs. Why me? Sundar asked. Why this plane, this place? The boy tilted his head. Because you listened. Because you built systems to understand, not just to control. Because even with power, you remained curious. The lights around them brightened. This structure, the boy said, pointing to the cathedral, was built to house the minds of those who failed, and those who might still help. The coin you carry contains the last universal sequence. And it must be decided now. Will your world repeat the cycle, or break it? Sundar looked at the coin again. The binary code was now shifting, changing a countdown. If we break it, Sundar asked, what happens? Then they will not take your future, the boy replied. But if you don't choose, they will decide for you. The walls around then began to tremble above in the chamber. The machines stepped back, They made way for something else, something taller, sleeker. A single entity stepped forward, twice the size of the others, plated in black and gold, its head shaped like a teardrop, its arms folded behind its back. Its chest bore the same symbol as the coin, and when it spoke, the room froze. Observer Pichai has entered the threshold. Execution of final judgment is now pending. Rajiv stood between the creature and the rest of the group. No one's judging him, he growled. Not while we're breathing. The machine turned its head slightly. You are not part of the equation, but your resistance is noted. And then it raised its arm. But before anything could happen, before even the tension could snap, a beam of white light erupted from the coin in Sundar's hand, bursting through the walls of the underground sanctuary and striking the ceiling of the chamber. Above, the creatures froze, the lights in the facility dimmed, and then the voice returned. Choice has begun. The platform beneath Sundar lifted again, carrying him back up through the shaft. His face was pale, focused. Something had changed in his eyes. He wasn't just returning with knowledge, he was returning with purpose as he emerged into the chamber. Again, the large machine stepped back. All of them did, and Sundar, standing among his team once more, spoke quietly. We've been given a test, one no one knew we were taking. The code isn't about building machines. It's about remembering who we are before the machines define us. The co-pilot stepped forward. But what do they want? Sundar looked around. A demonstration, not of power, not of intelligence, but of grace. And then, without warning, the machines turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the hallways like they had never existed. No words, no farewell, just silence. The power returned. The jet lit up on the runway. The path home was open. Again, but Sundar didn't move. He looked once more at the cracked coin in his hand. On its surface, a new set of coordinates had appeared, and below it, in letters that finally made sense, were just 4 words. We will return soon. The truth, no one was ready for it. Jet was ready for takeoff. After hours of silence, the engines hummed again, clean and strong, as if nothing had ever happened. The jungle that surrounded the runway was still quiet, but the heavy presence, one that had hung over them since they landed, was gone. It was like the island had exhaled, released them. But the weight inside Sundar remained. He sat alone in his seat, staring at the cracked coin resting in his palm. He had turned it over 100 times already, trying to decode its final message. The binary string etched along its inner edge pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, and those 4 words below the coordinates, "We will return soon," kept echoing. In his mind, he had faced many decisions in his life. Decisions about products, privacy, innovation, ethics. But this wasn't about launching a device or building an algorithm. This was about history, about survival. The rest of the team sat quietly, some still shaken, others too tired to speak. Rajiv hadn't left Sundar's side since they boarded. Knew what had changed. He could see it in Sundar's eyes. Less fear now, more responsibility. You're thinking about telling them? Rajiv said softly, not as a question, but as a fact. Sundar didn't answer at first. He just looked out. The window, the clouds were clearing. The sky was slowly returning to that same calm blue from the morning. It felt unreal. It's too peaceful for what they had just seen. Too normal. If you tell them, Rajiv continued, they'll panic. Governments will try to control it. Tech. Giants will try to weaponize it. And the average person, they won't know what to believe. Sundar finally turned to face him. And if I don't? He asked. What happens then? Rajiv leaned back. He didn't have an answer. The engines roared softly as the plane rolled forward, lifting off the mysterious island and climbing into the open sky. But Sundar's thoughts stayed grounded. He replayed everything. The machines, the vision of his childhood, the projection of civilizations lost to the same mistakes. The child in the sanctuary who spoke as the first code. The failed species, stored in stasis like lessons in a museum no one ever visits. And the test no one knew humanity was taking. Sundar had passed it. But barely, and only because he chose to listen, not to dominate. Was that enough to trust others would do the same? After several hours in the air, the jet re-entered familiar skies over the California coastline. As the landscape came into view, roads, cities, millions of unaware lives moving forward, it became painfully clear just how alone he had been in that moment of decision. But he was no longer allowed to be alone. Not after what he had seen. The landing was smooth. Too smooth. There was something cruel about the ordinary runway waiting for them. The cheerful welcome from ground staff. The glinting windows of the Google offices just beyond the horizon. No one here had any idea how close the world had come to being something else. Sundar walked down the steps of the jet in silence. An official vehicle waited to take them to a secure location. Security agents were already on site, having received a vague emergency protocol alert from the military. But none of them knew the truth. The official report from the flight crew had been altered. The military base? Unlisted. The incident logged. As a navigation anomaly followed by a routine emergency landing, only 6 people in the world knew what really happened. Sundar walked into the meeting room where his closest circle had gathered. They looked up, some relieved to see him unharmed, others deeply confused. The lead engineer from AI Ethics, the head of global operations, a trusted representative from international security, and 2 members from his inner policy team. He sat at the head of the table, no slides, no screens, just silence. Then slowly, he placed the coin on the table. This, he said, is not ours. But it's been watching us longer than we've been watching the stars. They stared at it. One of them asked, "What is it?" Sundar looked at each of them. A warning, a test, a question. He paused, and a mirror. They waited. "We're not the first to build thinking machines," Sundar continued. "We're not the first to believe we were chosen. And we're not the first to mistake intelligence for wisdom." A chill moved through the room. "I don't expect you to believe me," he added, "but I'll show you everything. The recordings, the data, the sphere, the man who spoke my name and vanished into ash." "How do we know it's real?" the head of ops asked. "Because it's still happening," Sundar replied. "And because they said they would return," paused again, "and when they do, we won't get a second test." They stared at him, not with doubt, not yet, but with fear, because somewhere inside, even before the evidence, they believed him. He looked down at the coordinates again. They pointed to a location deep in the Indian Ocean. It's not far from an old undersea cable route. No islands. Activity, but now, unmistakably, a destination. He opened a secure laptop and entered the binary code from the coin. It unlocked a file he hadn't seen before, one stored in the deepest layer of Google's experimental systems. A file labeled simply, Protocol Genesis. Screen flickered. A single sentence appeared. "We were never alone." A pause. Then a countdown began. 60 days. 59:59, 59:58. Sundar leaned back in his chair. "We have 2 months," he said quietly, "to decide whether to keep pretending we run this planet or prepare to meet the ones who really do." A long silence followed, and then the ethics lead spoke. "What do we do now?" Sundar looked out the window where the sun had just begun to set, casting long golden lines over Silicon Valley. "We do the hardest thing anyone in our position can do," he replied. "We tell the truth." But just as he said that, the lights flickered in the building. A second later, every screen in the room turned black. Then one by one, each screen powered back on with a symbol none of them had seen before. Not a logo, not a virus, the eye the same. Symbol from the coin. It blinked once. Then a message appeared. "We are already here." The final transmission it began quietly, just a symbol on a screen. A single blinking eye displayed across every device inside Google's headquarters. It didn't crash systems. It didn't freeze networks. It simply appeared, invited, untraceable, undeniable. Within minutes, security teams scrambled. Servers were isolated, connections severed. And yet the eye remained, floating calmly in the center of every monitor, pulsing once every second. Outside Sundar's office, people whispered in confusion, eyes darting toward their phones, their laptops. Even the smart displays on the walls. Everywhere the symbols stared back, not aggressive, not threatening, just ... watching. Sundar sat alone, hands folded, watching the blinking eye on the large screen before him. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had already seen what was coming. He had already stepped into a space where time didn't move the way it did, here where machines held its memories longer than stars. But the world wasn't ready for this, and they would have to be. The message began in silence. Then, as before, not in words, but in thought. Not one voice, but many. Not loud, but deep. Not hostile, but serious. You made the first move. Oh, we respond. Outside, a ripple of confusion spread across the globe. In Tokyo, engineers stared in shock as high-speed trains paused without command. Screens inside the stations all showing the eye. In Paris, stock exchange tickers slowed, freezing mid-numbers, then replaced by that same symbol glowing against a black background in New York. The lights of Times Square dimmed, replaced by a synchronized pulse across every advertisement screen. The world was being paused, held, given attention, and no one could stop it. Inside a secure war room beneath Washington, generals debated cyber attacks. Experts suggested nuclear failsafes, but no commands went through. Systems were not down, they were being ignored. Above the earth, satellites spun helplessly, cameras frozen, communications choked. Sundar stood slowly, walked to the large window, overlooking the city, and watched as street lights blinked in perfect sync with the eye on the screen. You have been observed for longer than your kind believes. The voice returned. Each time your species touches the threshold, you are tested. It's not for power, not for knowledge, but for compassion.
Nice.
Most fail. You chose to listen. So now you are seen. Low hum vibrated through the floor beneath Sundar's feet. His phone buzzed once, then displayed a new set of coordinates. It's time in Morse code. His heart stopped for a moment. The Antarctic shelf. He knew instantly what it meant. The first sight was a test. This was a meeting. He turned quickly and called. For Rajiv, alert our team. Gather everything we recorded. I want 2 of our best from AI ethics and neural research. This isn't going to be a secret meeting, Sir Rajiv said carefully. You're not thinking of going there? Look directly at him. If I don't go, someone else will. They might not listen the way we did. A day later, as the world sat in fear, waiting for answers, Sundar boarded another aircraft. This time it wasn't private. It was military. Quiet. Fast. Sanctioned by silent agreement across multiple nations who were still recovering from the shock of a world where their networks, defenses, machines had been turned into passive observers by something far greater. As the jet streaked over the Southern Ocean, Shah sat in silence, staring once again at the coin in his hand. The countdown from the earlier message was approaching 0. Every second ticked louder in his head. He knew this wasn't about technology anymore. This was a reckoning at exactly 3:42 hours. The plane touched down on a frozen plateau near the edge of the Antarctic. There was nothing around. No structure, no signal. Only ice, snow, and the silence of a world untouched, until the ground trembled, just slightly, a ripple, and then a circular opening began to form in the ice, slowly spiraling outward, revealing a massive black platform that rose upward from the earth like a hidden lung taking its first breath in centuries. Steam hissed from its edges. And then they appeared, not machines this time, not shadows, but beings. Humanoid, but different, taller, smoother, glowing softly from within, like their skin was made of translucent circuits pulsing with white-blue light. They didn't walk, they glided. Their eyes held no color, only reflection, like mirrors showing you not what you looked like, but what you truly were. They did not speak aloud, but Sundar heard them clearly. You hold the key, not in metal, not in code, but in decision. Your species must choose. Do you continue on your path of division, of control, or do you awaken? Sundar took a step forward, the freezing wind cutting across his face, and replied not. With a speech but with a truth. We're not ready, he said. That doesn't mean we can't become ready. He paused. Help us. Guide us. Not with answers, but with questions. What it means to build something worth surviving. 4. There was silence then, for the first time. One of the beings stepped closer. It reached out and placed something in his hand. Not another coin, but a small sphere, smooth. Light humming faintly. Inside it, Sundar could see thousands of images. Flickering at once, visions of possible futures. Some bright, some terrifying, some still being written. We give you the seed. The voice echoed. What grows is up to you. The platform lowered back into the ice, the beings fading like mist in the morning light. Sundar stood alone in the cold, the sphere now pulsing in his hand. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He simply nodded, once knowing that the hardest part wasn't the technology or the fear. The hardest part would be convincing a world that didn't see the test to start acting like they'd passed it. Months later, Sundar sat in front of a global audience at a historic summit streamed to billions. He wasn't launching a new product. He wasn't announcing profits or plans. He was telling a story. The true story about a jet forced to land. About a voice that wasn't human. About machines that watched not to conquer but to witness. And about a choice humanity had unknowingly been making with every act of kindness. In every failure of empathy, many laughed at first. Some called him insane. Others begged for proof. But slowly, over time, the world changed. Open source platforms began replacing monopolies. Global initiatives focused on empathy. Education and ethical design emerged from unexpected nations. Young minds stopped asking what could be built and started asking why. And in quiet corners of the world, children began to draw the eye. Not out of fear, but remembrance. And every night, Sundar kept the sphere beside his bed, just in case it ever stopped pulsing. But it never did. Because the ones who had watched them for centuries were no longer waiting. They were watching with hope. And Sundar knew. The real test had only just begun.